Welcome back, folks. In this entry, we'll be taking a look at Auric Goldfinger from the 1964 Bond film of the same name. Often regarded as one of the classic Bond movies and a top-tier installment in the Connery era, it's safe to say that the film wouldn't have its appeal if not for its simple but effective antagonists. A villain so straightforward in his objectives that his driving force can be adequately summed up in the statement of, "He loves only gold," as per the lyrics of the title song. And there we have it, folks. If your attention has waned, that's the quick version of it, and we can be done here. But if you're keen on the other aspects of his mindset, then let's continue. Based on what we know, Goldfinger is British, and it's perhaps possible that Goldfinger isn't his real name. His associates have other made-up names like Odd Job and Miss Galore, so perhaps Goldfinger itself is a made-up name bestowed on himself as an alias in his criminal dealings, combined with the fact that he probably loves to be associated with gold, and having it verbalized whenever someone addresses him is music to his ears. It's noteworthy that no one ever calls him by his first name of Auric. On the surface level, Goldfinger appears to be a legitimate businessman whose standout trait is how well-mannered and hospitable he is, traits that undoubtedly help him navigate the world of commerce that he thrives in. A darker side is seen, however, the least of which is hinted at by the prison cell he has at his horse farm, which he uses to hold Bond captive later. There's not much justification for a civilian like himself to have need of a prison, and it's unlikely that the local authorities would take kindly to that notion. Perhaps Goldfinger has made so many enemies in the course of his shady business that he would require his own personal dungeon on standby to deal with any hostile personalities. This prison that he keeps on hand is an extension of one of Goldfinger's recurring traits, namely his ability to be thoroughly well prepared. Beyond the pleasantries of the surface, however, Goldfinger is very much a criminal, one who has an unknown but likely a long list of crimes he's responsible for, all of which has eluded justice from another key attribute of his, that being the creativity he exhibits in his unlawful endeavors. Goldfinger isn't just a run-of-the-mill criminal, but a deviously crafty one, the least egregious of his crimes being the creative smuggling of gold overseas, an act which he labels as an art in his attempt to evade capture by the authorities. But given that later on we see that he has no qualms about using other heinous methods like deception and murder, it's safe to say that the totality of his 20 million pounds of wealth comprises similar ill-gotten gains. As he himself says it to Bond, "Many people have tried to involve themselves in my affairs unsuccessfully." It's all too clear what fate befalls those who cross his path or hinder his goals, as we see with the death of Jill, an act which demonstrates a level of sadism and perhaps psychopathy. For a man with an intense affinity for gold, this moment is rather peculiar for Goldfinger, choosing to expend his beloved gold in the form of paint. This ghastly adorning of gold perhaps caters to his need for showmanship, to flaunt not only his vast wealth, but a chilling display of the extreme measures he will take as vengeance. If Jill had been left in a more unremarkable manner, then it wouldn't have the same unsettling effect as beholding a corpse now turned into a lifeless statue. And perhaps by painting her in gold, this was a subtle jab at Bond, in implying that he had forcefully taken back the associate who was originally his. Of course, due to his need for showmanship, Bond is spared, as there would be no audience to notice this message if he were dead. Rather than having his opponent killed outright, Goldfinger would rather he lived in silent dread of him. And on a side note, the notion of skin suffocation which Bond diagnosed is actually not a real phenomena, so it must be that Jill was executed via other means. But in keeping with his character, it's possible that her death was anything but quick, given Goldfinger's penchant for dealing a slow and painful death, such as the usage of nerve gas on Fort Knox and when he intended to kill Bond with a laser by first removing him from his manly parts. Both cases highlight the concept of a gruesome fate brimmed with pain. Later on, Goldfinger displays a disturbing level of psychopathy, most notably in his master plan, which would entail the deaths of 60,000 lives comprising military personnel and civilians in his raid of Fort Knox. That figure is just an abstract number to him, and with no hint of guilt, he proceeds to coldly and callously justify the act with the notion that American motorists kill the same number every 2 years. If that's not the clearest sign of antisocial disorder in the film, it would be difficult to find an equal one. Now, earlier on, it was said that the summation of Goldfinger's motivation is the fact that he simply loves only gold. While that is true, it's not really the complete picture, and perhaps Jill makes the most astute statement when she mentions to Bond that Goldfinger cheats because he likes to win. Beyond his success in the business arena, we see that Goldfinger is quite a competitive person, as seen by his hobbies of card playing, golf, and horse racing, the former two activities in which he is found to be a cheat. And if winning is his main driver, then in a capitalist economy, what else could be a clearer sign of winning other than an opulent display of wealth? And what else is a better display of wealth than the precious metal of gold, a resource that has been coveted over the centuries and constitutes the basis for the leading currencies of the world? Of course, with a name like Goldfinger, he has a soft spot for the mere sight of the metal, so much that he is mesmerized by its gleam under the sun that it ruins his golf shot. But ultimately, it's the elevation of his ego and his reputation that is the issue, and he alludes to it himself when he equates the raiding of Fort Knox to the pinnacle of human achievement in the endeavor of crime. And once again in this moment, Goldfinger's trait of showmanship comes into play when he makes the absurd choice to give his elaborate presentation to his colleagues only to gas them to death afterwards. The only way to reconcile this illogical decision is that such an action bears witness to his need to appeal to his vanity by expressing his ingenious plan, similar to someone seeking applause for their display of intelligence. From a financial standpoint, it's not surprising that Goldfinger would write off his associates as he owes them $1 million each, which would then multiply to $10 million each as per their agreement. True, it might be bad business to off your colleagues, but at this point, if his plan comes to fruition, Goldfinger would already have reached the peak of his achievement, having established his name in the Hall of Fame in the field of crime. He would have no need to further collaborate with his associates, and the appeal of saving tens of millions of dollars only serves to make them all the more expendable. And for an additional reason thrown in perhaps, he just wanted to test out the nerve gas he was planning to unleash later. So effectively, he has no reason to not attack them save for morality. But that's a concept that we've already seen to be sorely lacking in him. Beyond betraying his business partners, it would seem that Goldfinger's relationship with his subordinates doesn't fare much better as well. One needs to look no further than the demeaning and degrading name of Odd Job that he gives to his manservant. And just as with his business partners, Odd Job is deemed expendable when push comes to shove. While OJ is absolutely loyal to him, even to the point of sacrificing his life so that the atomic device could go off, this loyalty is perhaps more rooted in his Korean culture than because of the fact that Goldfinger is a good boss. As for Miss Galore, we have no basis to claim that the name was given to her by Goldfinger, but there appears to be some instance of harassment towards her on his part. Goldfinger has a way with words which indicate a dark sense of humor, most notably seen when he tells Bond he expects him to die instead of talk, and when he mentions that Mr. Solo has a pressing engagement which we find out to be rather literal in meaning. In the end, while his plan failed, It would be hard to pinpoint a fatal flaw for which he is responsible. Sure, in retrospect, sparing Bond's life was a mistake, but at the time it seemed the logical choice, given his overly cautious and better safe than sorry approach. He took every known detail into account in his preparation, even to the point of wearing a United States Colonel's uniform as a backup. However, even he couldn't have possibly foreseen the charm of Bond in causing Miss Galore to foil his plan. A reminder that in any scheme, the human element is always the weak point. So the crippling point of his plan is not really his fault, but the same can't be said of his demise. His vindictive nature and his desire for revenge are the elements that become his undoing. Not all criminals manage to flee from their crimes, but Goldfinger had that privilege, and rather than relishing in the chance to escape, Goldfinger decides to go for revenge against Bond, which ultimately puts an untimely end to his life. A life lived in adoration of gold and the pursuit of wealth for the sake of his vanity, one that was encapsulated by greed and a lapse of morality resulting in much villainy.